LBC 97.3. Call 0845 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC 973. This is London's biggest conversation with Anthony Davis.
Monday night, LBC 97.3. I'm Anthony Davis, and thank you for joining the programme. Let's turn our attention first to Trenton Oldfield, who is the boat race protester, you may remember, from almost a year ago, who jumped into the Thames. He was on one of the little banks alongside the Thames just after the boat race took off, and swam in line of the boats and caused the boat race to be cancelled and restarted. A bit of a Ferrari, and one at the time I remember thinking, good on you, even though his activity was deemed illegal. Well, a judge today said that he intended to overturn Theresa May's decision to deny a visa to the protester, who was facing deportation and separation from his British wife and daughter, because his presence in the country was not conducive to the public good. So, in some ways, the government trying to silence protest. Now, do you think Trenton Oldfield should be allowed to stay in the UK with his family or be deported? Now, and despite the judge's decision today, of course, a hypothetical conversation, but I still recognise that the heart of this is actually something very, very serious. And that is not just Theresa May, but the authorities generally, who don't seem to be in favour of any type of protest. Now, most protests, the peaceful protests, tend to go off without getting any publicity at all. His protest, which didn't do any damage to anybody, didn't cause anybody harm, it certainly, though, got an enormous amount of media attention because of the kind of great historical and, some would say, elitist boat race that was disrupted. Now, what his point was, for some, is still unclear. I think it was highlighting the great divide between the haves and the have-nots. But maybe his message could have been clearer. But he certainly got the attention of the media and the publicity that was necessary at least to begin a conversation. But should he be deported for his free right to protest? And is the government trying to silence protesters? We've seen this recently when people take to the streets with placards and the police are filming everybody, whether they're peaceful or not. 0845 6060 973 is the number to call. That's 0845 6060 973. Peter Tatchell is a human rights campaigner, one of the most famous, one of the finest, and joins us now. Peter, good evening.
Good evening.
So this is a serious issue. I mean, outside of Trenton Oldfield's potential deportation, which is now not to happen, there is something going on where the government don't like us to actually exercise our right to free speech.
Well, you're right. I think the way Trenton Oldfield has been treated is symptomatic of a tightening of the screw on freedom of expression and the right to protest. Let's recall that for that peaceful, non-violent disruption of the boat race, he got sentenced to 6 months in prison. Now, that's more than some people who commit violent crimes get. It's certainly more than big corporate tax avoiders and other corporate criminals get. So you've got to ask yourself, why was his sentence so disproportionate? And then, having served his sentence, why did the Home Secretary decide that he was such a threat to public order that he needed to be deported? A deportation order is very rare and is usually only reserved for people who are implicated in terrorism or serious organized crime. Again, the deportation order was entirely and utterly disproportionate to what he did. Even if you take the view that what he did was wrong, it was out of order and disproportionate.
Do you think that Theresa May was offended that a great British institution like the boat race was disrupted, and it darkens what is a very bright day for a lot of people? I mean, is this a personal thing? Because really this is about a protest and nothing more than a protest.
Well, you're right in one sense. I mean, Trenton Oldfield claims that 70% of the cabinet are Oxbridge graduates, and that's why he was protesting against the elitism of the British government and other institutions which disproportionately take their people from Oxford and Cambridge. Now, whether that was the motivation of Theresa May, I sort of doubt, but you've got to ask yourself, what did motivate her to put in this extraordinary deportation order? It just doesn't, conform to the normal practice about the way in which deportation orders are used.
Well, as I was saying in my introduction, maybe she was in some way trying to make up for the debacle surrounding Abu Qatada, and maybe she was seeking to flex her muscles. The fact that in one way her hands had been tied, and this was an opportunity for her to actually prove that she had some authority, although the decision has been overturned by the courts. But let's just look for a second, Peter, to the wider issue of regular people who might be listening to this programme tonight, who feel aggrieved about something that is local or social or connected in some way to the authority and to the country in which we live, who don't feel that they have not just the time to protest, because I think people are working harder than ever and can't even make the time, but also feel that in some way if they were to protest, then they might be arrested for it, as we saw recently with, say, Caroline Lucas.
Well, that's right. I mean, the law has been used in many bizarre ways to clamp down on protest. I've been a victim of this. Some people may recall that in 1998, I peacefully and calmly interrupted the then Archbishop of Canterbury's Easter service to criticize his support for anti-gay discrimination in law. And as a result, I was charged and convicted under the 1860 Ecclesiastical Courts Jurisdiction Act, formerly part of the Brawling Act of 1552. I mean, really, the police and the courts had to dig deep in the barrel to find something to charge me with. And I'm just one of many, many people. Right now, the government has a new law before Parliament, a new bill. It's called the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Bill. And under Clause 1, it will make a criminal offence for someone to cause a nuisance or annoyance to another person, and if they break an injunction against that, they'll be liable to imprisonment. Now, what constitutes a nuisance or annoyance is not defined in the law, and that is very, very worrying because, playing, music that someone doesn't like could be annoying. Protesting against Scientology could be very annoying to Scientologists. Campaigning outside a bank about, banks evading their proper moral and ethical and economic responsibility to pay proper tax, that could be annoying to the bank. This is just symptomatic of the drip, drip, drip corrosion of the right to protest that's been going on for a very long time. I think back to the Public Order Act of 1986. We were told it was originally intended to crack down on football hooligans and people who indulged in violent, riotous behavior. Very soon after the Public Order Act was passed in 1986, it became almost entirely used to clamp down on peaceful, non-violent protests. And people were arrested for all kinds of reasons. Even people who weren't protesting, Christian street preachers who were preaching in the street were arrested under this law.
But Peter, there is also a fear, and it's a fear that I've seen when I visited the anti-capitalist protest at St Paul's or the Democracy Village at Parliament Square, is that it's as if the government, and possibly some of the newspapers as well, have started to turn people against each other. So the protester is looked upon as this uncouth, unwashed student layabout who doesn't have a job and should be out working and not wasting time protesting and wasting police time. I mean, this is this new rhetoric which I fear is going to get us into an awful lot of trouble.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've got to remember that protest is the lifeblood of a democracy. In North Korea, they don't have protests. And why? Because it is a very authoritarian regime. Protest is a way in which we hold governments to account, which we challenge those in power in between elections. And, without protest, we become a shadow of a democracy. And I think it's really important that even people I disagree with, I think it's really important that they protest to express their point of view and have their point of view heard. That's what democracy is all about. Even if you don't agree with the protest, the fact that people are concerned and passionate, engaged and involved, that is really good. That's a strength of democracy. It's a sign of a healthy democracy. When protests cease, then you've got to start to worry.
But when we talk about protest in this country, if we were to talk about protesters, the name that we think of is Peter Tatchell. But there are many others. But why? How did you break the mold? How long did it take to actually be accepted into the kind of psyche of Brits and indeed the media to accept that if you're involved, there is some kind of legitimate protest? Because this is my worry: is that it takes so long for people to break through. It takes so long for people to be heard, and stopping short of being arrested at the very first hurdle. It seems like I can name you and maybe 2 or 3 others who are, our legitimate protesters who are taken seriously.
Well, you're right. I've been protesting for over 46 years for human rights. For human rights for everyone. People think I'm just a gay rights protester. No, I'm not. I campaign for all human rights for everyone, everywhere. And I've been doing it for nearly half a century. It's only in the last 10 years that I've sort of got a measure of respectability, if you like. And that's great, but it shouldn't take me that long. It shouldn't take other people that long. I think we should value the fact that people in our society, whatever their point of view, wherever they're coming from, we should value the fact that they actually want to get off their backsides and do something, to engage with society, to protest against things they feel strongly about, whether it be just noisy neighbours, or whether it be against people who honk their car horns too much, or maybe it's about the conversion of some derelict land into an adventure playground for local kids, or better services for senior citizens who are housebound. Any kind of protest is a good thing.
And to encourage people
agree with it.
To encourage people to protest about stuff that doesn't necessarily directly affect them, but affects other people, to the extent that you feel emotionally connected or you feel empathy for.
Absolutely. When I think of the history of this country, nearly all the rights and freedoms we have were won through protest. The Chartists and the suffragettes, very notably, won for us the right of working-class people and women to have the vote. If they hadn't protested, that right to vote would have been many, many years or decades delayed. So we owe the right to vote itself to protest. And when you think about Margaret Thatcher's poll tax policy, which was an incredible injustice where she wanted the rich to pay just the same as the poorest, people saw that as really unfair. So they protested by either withholding their payments or not paying their poll tax, or they protested and marched in the streets. And as a result, we forced the Thatcher government to climb down, and that policy was eventually ditched. So
Indeed.
Protest has brought us so many different benefits across the board. It's brought us women's rights, improved rights for black and ethnic minority people. It's protest that has driven social progress. And I think we should be really proud that liberty, the right to protest, has been a core British value for so many years, and we must resist governments, police and courts who try and diminish our rights and freedoms.
OK. Peter, thank you very much for joining us on LBC tonight. Peter Tatchell, human rights campaigner on LBC 97.3. So we're using the example tonight of Trenton Oldfield, the protester who disrupted the Oxford-Cambridge boat race last year, who has today found out that he won't be deported back to Australia. Yes, he was facing deportation after Theresa May denied his visa because she said his presence here was not conducive to the public good. So what does Theresa mean by that? And why does a peaceful protest mean that a man who has right to live in the UK, I mean, he's from a colony, former, Commonwealth nation anyway, but is married to a British woman. I mean, why on earth should he not be allowed to stay? Why is Theresa May flexing her muscles? Why are the government seeking to silence protest? 0845 6060 973. I'm Anthony Davis, back with more of your calls and the front pages of tomorrow morning's newspapers. Next.
LBC 97.